Everyone treats SpongeBob fan art as doodles in a notebook, sketches taped to a bedroom wall, tributes made by kids who will grow out of it. Then a team spent 2 years rebuilding the movie shot by shot, and Paramount killed it in 2 hours. In this video, we break down the best fan-made SpongeBob art and animation online, the Shonen Reimagining. Narmak's SpongeBob anime. A yellow sponge in a white shirt and a brown tie is not the first thing anyone pictures when they think of a blood-soaked fighting anime. He works a fry cook job. He laughs at his own jokes. His biggest enemy is a one-eyed germ who lives across the street. In 2017, an American animator working under the name Narmak took that character, put him at the center of a shonen opening sequence, and built something that spread across the internet fast enough to pull in copyright strikes, a Japanese voice cast, and a fan campaign aimed at YouTube itself. Narmak was already working in a specific corner of online animation before SpongeBob ever entered the picture. His approach involved taking properties that had nothing to do with Japanese animation and dropping them into the visual language of shonen, a category of Japanese comics and cartoons aimed mainly at teenage boys and known for long-running rivalries, dramatic power-ups, and fight scenes animated with far more detail than the rest of the show around them. His earlier milestone video, called Attack on Ogre, pulled the Shrek franchise together with the anime Attack on Titan and characters from Pokemon, and that video is what established him inside the online anime community before the SpongeBob project ever started. The choice was not random. Narmak has described his own work as growing out of a combined love for Japanese comics and Western cartoons, everything from late-night adult animation to the shonen material he studied closely. He has talked about the way he learned the craft, rewinding and rewatching specific sequences over and over just to understand the technique behind them, particularly the fluid, detail-heavy animation that fans call sakuga. That kind of study is what separates a joke video from something that works as real animation, and it is the reason his SpongeBob work landed differently than the thousands of other cartoon parodies floating around the same platform. The first SpongeBob anime opening went up in 2017. It reimagined the familiar Nickelodeon opening as the credit sequence for a dramatic Japanese fighting series, complete with music that fit the genre and animation built around every visual habit that genre relies on. Characters stare off screen at nothing in particular. The camera swings around during moments of sudden motion. Everyone looks more muscular, more serious, and considerably more tired of their own lives. SpongeBob runs toward a sunset with no explanation of why he is running or what he is running toward. None of it needs dialogue, because the entire point rests on how instantly recognizable those visual habits are to anyone who has watched even a handful of anime openings. The technical side of that first video deserves more attention than it usually gets, because the joke only lands if the animation is actually good. Anime openings work through a very particular rhythm. There is a slow build across the first several seconds, usually a single character standing still while the music holds back. Then the drums come in, and the whole sequence unloads everything at once, cutting between characters every half second, throwing in 1 or 2 shots of really detailed movement, and finishing with the entire cast standing together in a single wide shot. Narmak followed that rhythm exactly. The pacing, the beat changes, and the shot lengths all match what a real opening does, which is why the video reads as a parody of the form rather than a random collection of cartoon characters looking angry. What made it work was the mismatch. SpongeBob SquarePants has never carried any real weight. The show is built on a character who is cheerful to the point of being annoying, surrounded by people who find him exhausting. Placing that character inside a format designed for revenge arcs and generational grudges created a joke that did not need a single line of narration to explain itself. Viewers understood it immediately, and the video spread quickly across social media and video sites through the back half of 2017. Narmak returned with a second opening, which he shared on Twitter on February 3, 2018. This one went darker and considerably rougher than the first, leaning into the bloodier end of the genre and making it clear the project was not aimed at the audience Nickelodeon had built the original show for. Squidward, who spends the actual cartoon as a bitter neighbor with a clarinet, was redesigned into something really threatening. SpongeBob was given detailed facial work built specifically to carry anger, which is not an expression the real show has much use for. The animation quality had climbed noticeably from the first video, and coverage at the time singled out how well the music and the movement fit together. By this point, the project had taken on a shape nobody planned for at the start. What began as one animator answering a strange question about what a Western cartoon would look like through an anime-obsessed lens had turned into an ongoing series with its own internal story. The relationship between SpongeBob and Squidward was built to echo the rivalry between Naruto and Sasuke, right down to the jealousy running underneath it, and the light and dark color choices used to separate the two characters visually. Patrick and Mr. Krabs, who function in the real show as an idiot and a cheapskate, were reworked into wise mentor figures. Because a shonen story is almost required to have one, there is a specific craft decision buried in that character work that explains why the project kept growing instead of burning out after one video. Narmak did not simply redraw the SpongeBob cast with sharper lines and darker shadows. He rebuilt each character around the role that character would be forced to play if the show actually were a shonen series. A fighting anime needs a protagonist who is underestimated, a rival who resents him, and at least one older figure who knows more than he is saying. SpongeBob already fits the first role almost perfectly, since the actual cartoon spends most of its runtime with people dismissing him. Squidward already resents him. The pieces were sitting there in the original show, and the parody worked because it pointed at pieces that were really present rather than inventing new ones. That growth came with a cost that had nothing to do with animation. Both of the first two openings were demonetized, and Narmak's channel was hit with copyright strikes over them. For an independent animator, that is not a minor inconvenience. It removes the income from the work and puts the entire channel at risk, which is enough to end most projects permanently. The third opening only got finished because supporters on Patreon funded it directly, and when it finally arrived in 2019, coverage at the time openly wondered how long Nickelodeon would allow it to stay online at all. The third opening was framed as the opening for the final season of a series that had never actually existed, revealing past secrets and pushing toward a last battle. That framing device is worth sitting with, because it shows how completely the project had committed to the joke. Narmak was not making individual parody videos anymore. He was making the openings for a fictional multi-season anime, and the audience had bought into that fiction completely enough that the arc structure made sense to them. Then, in 2020, the project stopped being a series of openings and became an actual episode. Narmak released a full-length installment under the name Suponji Bobu, built around the Bubble Bass arc, performed by a Japanese voice cast with English subtitles. The animation on that release took roughly 6 months to complete. Characters were pushed further from their original personalities to fit the format, with Squidward turned into something even more self-loathing than the version Nickelodeon airs and Patrick reworked into a calm figure full of borrowed wisdom. The decision to record the whole thing in Japanese with English subtitles is worth pulling apart, because it is the choice that separates this from every other cartoon parody on the platform. Using the original English voices would have been easier, cheaper, and funnier in a cheap way, since hearing familiar voices in unfamiliar situations gets a laugh on its own. Casting Japanese performers instead removed that easy laugh completely and replaced it with something closer to commitment. The finished episode does not sound like a joke about anime. It sounds like an anime, which means the humor has to come from the writing and the animation, rather than from the audience noticing a mismatch in the audio. That is a harder version of the same project, and it is the version he made. The visual language went the same direction. The episode is built around the kind of extended confrontation a fighting series would use, with the Krusty Krab and its regulars repurposed into the setting for something the original show would never stage. Familiar background details from Bikini Bottom survive intact, which keeps the whole thing anchored, while everything happening in front of those backgrounds behaves according to completely different rules. The response was large enough that it created its own problem. Episode 1 was removed from YouTube after being flagged for a policy violation, and the removal appears to have been a mistake rather than a decision anyone actually made on purpose. Fans responded by pushing the hashtag #SaveSpongeBobAnime until it trended, and the pressure worked. YouTube reposted the episode. A fan animation had reached the point where the audience around it could successfully argue with the platform hosting it and win. In 2021, Narmak released a breakdown explaining how the whole thing was built, naming Naruto and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as the two heaviest influences on the style. He has also been open about the limits of his own explanation, saying plainly that he cannot really explain why or how he does a lot of what he does. That admission is more useful than a technical walkthrough would be, because it points at the part of this work that cannot be reverse engineered. The timing, the exaggeration, and the specific choice of which frame to hold for an extra beat are all instinct built through years of watching. The project did not stop there either. A new opening sequence arrived years later, teasing a Fry Cook Games arc, keeping a fictional anime alive years after most viral videos would have been forgotten completely. Along the way, the fandom around the fan work built its own fandom, with people producing artwork based on Narmak's designs, recording covers of the music, and cutting together their own mixes of the openings and endings. Narmak has pointed to that spread as one of his favorite parts of the whole thing, particularly the people who tag and credit the original work rather than passing it off as their own. He has also made a specific point about why he started down this road at all. He made non-anime openings because nobody else was making them, and he has said directly that seeing more of them appear is exciting to him, because it means the idea outgrew the person who had it. That last part is the piece that matters most about this whole project. A single animator built a format that other people could pick up and run with, and the format spread far past SpongeBob into dozens of other properties. The work also proved something that most of the fan projects covered later in this video ran into eventually, which is that the better a fan animation gets, the more likely it is to attract attention from the people who own the characters. Narmak's openings were good enough to trigger copyright strikes and good enough to survive them, and both halves of that sentence are part of why the project is remembered. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. One animator working alone can build something that big over a few years, something entirely different happens when 80 of them agree to work on the same 20 minutes of cartoon at once, each one drawing a few seconds in whatever style they want, with nobody coordinating what the finished thing will actually look like. Section 2. The crowd-built tribute, the Help Wanted reanimated collab. There is a specific kind of animation project that only exists because the internet made it possible, and it works nothing like a normal production. In a reanimated collaboration, a group of animators divides an existing piece of film into shots, and each person recreates one or more of those shots in whatever style they personally work in. The individual pieces are then stitched back together in the original order and released as a single video. The point is not to match the original or to produce something that looks unified. The point is the opposite. Every few seconds, the art style changes completely, and the joy of watching one comes from the whiplash. The format had already proven itself before anyone pointed it at Bikini Bottom. In August 2018, animator Josh Palmer, who works under the name Zurel, curated a reanimated version of the 1942 cartoon The Dover Boys at Pimento University, with more than 90 independent animators recreating the short scene by scene in their own styles. That video went up on August 27, 2018, and pulled in close to 3 million views. Around the same period, Andrew Keppel of Albino Black Sheep hosted a project that reanimated the steamed ham sequence from the 1996 Simpsons episode 22 short films about Springfield, with a different animator taking over every 13 seconds. The format worked, the audience was there, and the community of animators willing to donate weeks of unpaid labor to a tribute clearly existed. The format also has a habit of pointing itself at material that has come back into public conversation for reasons outside the work itself. Sometimes that is an internet meme dragging an old cartoon back into view. Sometimes it is nostalgia hitting a generation at the exact age where they have the skills to do something about it. Sometimes it is the death of a creator or a voice actor. In 2019, more than 200 animators reanimated the Chowder Holiday Special in their own styles and dedicated the finished piece to the show's creator and everyone who worked on it. These projects run on volunteers who expect to make nothing, because a tribute built out of somebody else's characters cannot legally be sold, and everyone involved understands that going in. SpongeBob was an obvious next target for reasons that go beyond popularity. The show has a visual language that almost every animator alive has absorbed whether they meant to or not, which means an artist can twist it in any direction and viewers will still recognize what they are looking at. The character designs are simple enough to redraw quickly and expressive enough to survive being redrawn badly on purpose. The project that came out of this was organized and hosted by an animator working under the name Extra Absorbent, and it aimed at the most obvious possible target. Help Wanted is the first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, the one where SpongeBob applies for the fry cook job at the Krusty Krab. Every single thing the show would become over the following decades starts in that episode. Recreating it, shot by shot, meant recreating the exact moment the whole thing began. The scale of the thing is difficult to overstate. More than 80 animators joined the project, and the work took over a year to finish. Credits were tracked in a public spreadsheet with time codes attached to every contributor so that anyone watching could find out exactly who animated any given second of the video. A dedicated account was set up purely to post updates while the work was underway, which meant the audience watched the project assemble itself in public over months, rather than seeing it appear out of nowhere. The release date was chosen with real care. The collab went live on August 21st, 2019, which is Steven Hillenburg's birthday. Hillenburg, the marine biologist turned animator who created the show, had died on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57 from ALS, a disease he had publicly revealed he was diagnosed with in March 2017. The project had been in progress before his death, and finishing it and putting it out on his birthday turned a 20th anniversary tribute into a memorial at the same time. The show itself had premiered in 1999, which made 2019 the 20-year mark. Hillenburg's own path makes the tribute land harder than a normal memorial project would. He was born on August 21, 1961 in Lawton, Oklahoma, earned a degree focused on marine resources from Humboldt State University in 1984, and spent time teaching at a marine institute in Dana Point, California, before going back to school for animation and earning a fine arts degree in 1992. He worked on Rocko's Modern Life through the mid-90s before creating SpongeBob. That biography explains why a show about a sea sponge who works a fry cook job was written by somebody who actually knew what a sea sponge was, and it explains why so many of the people reanimating his first episode described the show as the reason they learned to draw in the first place. Hillenburg came to animation from somewhere else entirely, which is exactly the story most of the volunteers on the project were living through themselves. Watching the finished video is a strange experience, because the audio stays completely constant, while everything visual underneath it refuses to hold still. The original dialogue and sound run underneath the whole thing, so viewers already know every line coming. What changes is everything else. One shot arrives in careful, clean animation that looks close to the real show. The next arrives as rough pencil work that barely holds together. Then something drawn in a completely different tradition entirely. Then something built in 3 dimensions. Then something something that is clearly a joke at the expense of the shot before it. That constant switching is what makes the format work as a piece of art rather than a novelty. A shot-for-shot recreation would just be a worse version of the original. A reanimated collab is a survey of what 80 different people bring to the exact same 20 seconds of material. The differences between contributors become the actual content. Watching it, a viewer ends up learning more about how animation styles differ than any explanation could teach, purely by seeing the same character drawn 80 different ways inside the space of a few minutes. The audience response was strong and immediate. The project holds a rating above 9 out of 10 on listings that track it, and community discussion at the time focused specifically on how much labor was visibly stacked into every scene change. Fans watching it kept returning to the same observation, that the shifting animation style made a 20-year-old episode feel worth watching again, which is not a small achievement for material most of the audience had already seen dozens of times. Then the takedown arrived. The video was blocked on YouTube because of a copyright claim from Viacom, the company that owned the property at the time. That block did not destroy the project, because the team had already thought about where else it could live. The full collab was posted on Newgrounds, the long-running animation site that has hosted independent Flash and web animation since long before YouTube existed, and the original YouTube upload was replaced with a redirect pointing viewers there instead. Later, the video was re-uploaded again, with the description openly explaining that the re-upload existed in case the block came back. Newgrounds mattering here is worth a moment on its own. The site has hosted independent web animation since the era when everything online moved through Flash, long before video sharing looked anything like it does now. It survived the death of Flash, and it kept a culture built around animators posting finished work directly rather than optimizing for a recommendation system. For fan animators, that history turned it into something closer to a safety net. When a large corporate rights holder blocks a video on the biggest platform in the world, the work does not disappear as long as a copy already lives somewhere that is not built around automated claim systems. That pattern matters, and it shows up repeatedly across every project in this video. Fan animators building large-scale work stopped treating YouTube as the permanent home for anything years ago. Copies get mirrored to Newgrounds, uploaded to archive sites, and handed around directly, specifically because the people making this work have learned that a single automated claim can remove years of labor in seconds, with no warning and no human being involved in the decision. What that first SpongeBob collab left behind reaches well past the 20 minutes of animation itself. It proved that the format worked on a property this size, and it demonstrated that the SpongeBob animation community was large enough and organized enough to pull off something on that scale. The project also created a template for everything that followed, including the credit spreadsheet, the public update account, the tribute framing, and the practice of mirroring the finished work somewhere outside YouTube before the takedown ever arrived. Most of all, it established the emotional shape these projects would keep using. A group of people who grew up on a show, most of whom learned to draw partly because of that show, spent a year of unpaid nights recreating the first 20 minutes of it and released the result on the birthday of the man who made it. None of them got paid, almost none of them got individually famous for it. The work exists because they wanted it to exist. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 20 minutes and 80 animators turned out to be the small version of this idea. Less than 3 weeks after that project went live, a second collab arrived built around a different episode entirely, with almost double the number of artists and a musical performance sitting at the center of it that nobody was going to let go quietly. Section 3. The Sweet Victory Sequel. Band Geek's reanimated Squidward Tentacles spends most of his existence being humiliated, and one episode in the second season handed him the single largest victory of his entire life. Band Geeks puts him in charge of a marching band assembled out of the least musical people in Bikini Bottom, purely so he can avoid being embarrassed in front of his old rival Squilliam. Rehearsals go badly enough that the band argues about whether mayonnaise counts as an instrument. Then the Bikini Bottom superband walks onto the field at the Bubble Bowl and performs a full arena rock song, and the entire episode turns into the closest thing the show has ever produced to a sincere emotional payoff. That song is called Sweet Victory, and the cartoon did not commission it. It came from production music, the category of pre-recorded tracks that television shows license rather than commissioning fresh material. The song was created by David Glenn Isley and Bob Kulick and performed by Isley, and for years afterward, large numbers of people who heard it in the episode assumed it belonged to a famous rock band, with guesses landing on names like Van Halen, Journey, Kiss, and Queen. During a marathon counting down the 100 greatest Nicktoon episodes, the Bubble Bowl performance was named the single greatest moment in the history of Nickelodeon's animated output. The reason that background matters is because of what happened to the song after Steven Hillenburg died on November 26, 2018. Within days, a fan named Israel Kalunga started a petition on change.org asking the NFL to have Sweet Victory performed at the halftime show for Super Bowl Lee, framing the request as a tribute to Hillenburg's legacy and his contribution to a generation of children. The petition passed 700,000 signatures signatures by early December. It crossed 1 million by January. By the time the game arrived, it had gathered around 1.2 million names, which turned a fan request into something the NFL could no longer quietly ignore. What arrived on the night of the game was considerably less than what the petition asked for. Maroon 5 headlined the halftime show, and roughly 3 minutes into the performance, SpongeBob and Squidward appeared in a short exclusive clip that referenced band geeks and then handed the stage over to Travis Scott. The clip lasted seconds. The full song did not play. The backlash across the internet was immediate and loud, with fans describing the moment as a bait and switch, built to satisfy a petition on a technicality rather than honor anybody. The reaction that followed is the part that gets forgotten. The full song, along with a dedication to Hillenburg, was played inside the stadium after the game had ended, and most of the audience had already gone home. The Dallas Stars responded to the complaints by playing the entire song at their own arena during a game, going as far as recoloring the animated band uniforms to match their team colors, and swapping the stadium in the footage for their own building. In September 2019, the Clemson marching band played Sweet Victory on the field after beating Texas A&M. A song from a children's cartoon had turned into a piece of shared property that institutions started performing on their own. That is the environment the second SpongeBob collab arrived into. The Help Wanted project had gone live on August 21, 2019. 17 days later, on September 7, 2019, a second reanimated collaboration was released. This one aimed directly at band geeks. Where the first project pulled together more than 80 animators, this one gathered over 140 artists, and the finished piece ran roughly 16 minutes. Newgrounds appears in the credits as the production company behind it, which reflects how central that platform had become to this whole scene, rather than any traditional studio arrangement. Choosing band geeks created a technical problem the first collab never had to solve. Help Wanted is dialogue and physical comedy. Animators could take a shot, redraw it however they wanted, and hand it back as long as the timing matched the audio underneath. Band Geeks ends with a musical performance, and music does not forgive sloppy timing. Every animator working on the final stretch had to sync their own work to a specific beat inside a song that the entire audience knows by heart. A shot that lands even slightly off will read as a mistake to viewers who have heard that track hundreds of times, and the collab format makes that worse rather than better, because the style is already changing every few seconds and the music becomes the only thing holding the sequence together. The finished project handles that stretch by leaning into it rather than trying to hide the seams. The performance sequence moves through style after style, and each animator gets a few bars of the song to do whatever they want with. Some contributors played it straight and delivered clean work that could sit inside the original episode without anyone noticing. Others went completely sideways, switching to entirely different mediums, dropping in references to other cartoons, or building their few seconds around a joke aimed at the shot before theirs. One credited reference in the finished piece points back to Snorks, the 1984 undersea cartoon that has been compared to SpongeBob by viewers for decades. The layering in that sequence is what separates it from a simple tribute. The audience is watching a cartoon about a group of people who cannot play instruments, somehow pulling off a perfect performance together, and that story is being told by more than 100 artists who also had to somehow perform together despite never sharing a room, a schedule, or a house style. The episode's actual subject and the method used to recreate it ended up describing the same thing, which is not something anyone could have planned for in advance. The response to the finished collab tracked closely with the first. Ratings on listing sites landed just under 9 out of 10, and community discussion focused on the same two things every time: the sheer number of styles on display and the specific pleasure of watching a familiar scene get handed to somebody with completely different instincts. For animation fans, the format doubles as a directory. A viewer who likes one particular 10-second stretch can look up the credit list, find the person who animated it, and go watch everything else that person has made. Several contributors to these projects picked up followings that came directly from a few seconds of work inside somebody else's collab. The credit practice deserves attention because it runs against how most large animation projects operate. On a professional production, individual animators are buried in a credit crawl that almost nobody reads, and the work is deliberately smoothed out so that no single person's style shows through. A reanimated collab inverts both of those things completely. The whole appeal is that individual style shows through, and the credit lists are built with time codes attached so viewers can match every second of footage to the person who drew it. Volunteers who are not being paid get paid in visibility instead, and the format is structured to deliver that visibility as precisely as possible. The timing of these two projects, less than 3 weeks apart, also says something about the state of the community during 2019. That year sat at the intersection of the show's 20th anniversary and the first year after Hillenburg's death, and the amount of fan labor pointed at SpongeBob during that window was enormous. Petition drives, memorial artwork, marching band performances, and 2 full-length reanimated collaborations all landed inside roughly 9 months. None of it was coordinated by Nickelodeon. All of it came from people who had grown up on the show and had reached an age where they could make things. What the Band Geeks collab left behind is the proof that the format could handle material with real emotional weight rather than just comedy. The Bubble Bowl full performance is the moment most fans point to when asked why they care about a cartoon aimed at children, and handing that sequence to 140 artists could easily have flattened it into a novelty. Instead, the constant style changes gave the performance something the original never had, which is the visible presence of a crowd of people all reaching for the same thing at the same time. The episode is about a group succeeding together against every reasonable expectation. The collab is a group succeeding together against every reasonable expectation. Both versions end with the same song. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 20 minutes and 16 minutes are still short films. A different group had already spent 2 years pointing the same format at something feature length, and when they finally released it, the entire thing was gone from the internet before the first viewers had even finished watching it. Section 4. The 2-year feature. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie rehydrated. The 2004 SpongeBob movie is 90 minutes long. Reanimating an episode means dividing 20 minutes among 80 people. Reanimating a feature means dividing 4.5 times that much footage, holding a volunteer team together across years rather than months, and solving problems that a short film never runs into, including how to keep a story coherent when the visual style changes every few seconds for an hour and a half straight. A group of fan animators decided to do it anyway. The project was called the SpongeBob SquarePants Movie Rehydrated, and it was hosted by a team rather than a single organizer, with Pasta Dash Creations, Angel Gonzalez, Kane Patrick, the Pickle Man, and Nick Mahoney sharing the load. Pasta Dash Creations handled editing on the finished film, which on a project this size is closer to a full-time job than a credit. The work stretched across more than 2 years, and the management running it changed hands in April 2020 partway through, with new people stepping in to carry the rest of it. Projects built entirely on volunteer time rarely survive a leadership change that far into production. This one did. The scale went past animation. Rather than lifting the original audio and animating over it, the team recast the entire film with fan voice actors and recorded fresh performances for every role. Double Time 32 covered SpongeBob, Patrick, and Gary. The Gonz fam handled both Mr. Krabs and Squidward. Dugo voiced Plankton, Beckons played Karen, Crystal Avenger took Sandy, and Jeremy Weaver voiced Mrs. Puff. Some Guy Voices played King Neptune, Pasta Dash Creations covered Mindy, Golden Drago took Dennis, and Blake Hussey voiced the David Hasselhoff role. Smaller parts were spread across dozens more contributors, down to individual pirates and background fish. The music was rebuilt from scratch as well. Contributors produced and performed original tracks for the film, including a piece called A Band of Jellyfish produced and performed by 3X Blast, and another called Lamprey, produced and performed by Barnacle Head. Kyle Carosa produced music for the project with saxophone, performed by Lindsay Carosa. One sequence involved a derivative of a well-known Shakira song performed by the Gonz fam, credited properly to the original writers. A fan film that could have leaned on the existing soundtrack instead paid for its own audio in labor. The ending carried something that no other project in this video managed to include. The film closes with a tribute short, directed by Angel Gonzalez and written by the Pickle Man and Angel Gonzalez, featuring archive recordings of Tom Kenny and Steven Hillenburg voicing early concept versions of SpongeBob and Squidward. Those recordings are from the material that existed before the show was a show, back when the characters were still being pitched. Placing them at the end of a 2-year fan project means the finished film closes with the actual voices of the man who created the property and the actor who has voiced its lead character since 1999, sitting inside work made by people who were not born yet when those recordings were made. The premiere landed on May 2nd, 2022. Within 2 hours of the upload going live, the video was copyright blocked by Paramount, which now owned the property. The film contained original animation, original voice performances, and original music. The audio was not the studio's audio. The animation was not the studio's animation. The claim came through anyway, because these claims are generated by automated systems matching against a reference database, rather than by a person watching the video and making a judgment. What happened next moved faster than anyone involved expected. The hashtag Justice for SpongeBob started spreading within hours, and trended worldwide on Twitter. Large animation-focused creators picked it up and pushed it further, with the YouTuber Saberspark among the most visible, framing the takedown as a direct insult to a team that had spent 2 years recreating the film piece by piece with their own animation and voice work. Fans pointed out repeatedly that full uploads of actual SpongeBob episodes sat untouched on the same platform, while a non-profit tribute got removed in under 2 hours. Comparisons to Nintendo's reputation for shutting down fan projects showed up constantly across the same conversation. The team did not wait for the platform to sort it out. By 5 in the afternoon Pacific time on the same day, the movie had been reposted to Newgrounds in 2 parts, and viewers were already watching it there. That reflex, mirroring a project somewhere outside YouTube the moment trouble arrives, had been standard practice in this community since the Help Wanted collab got blocked in 2019, and it is the only reason 2 years of work stayed available while the dispute played out. Later that same day, Paramount lifted the claim. The team announced the return in 2 words. In a statement given at the time, they explained that the surprise came less from being claimed at all and more from the fact that the material the claim pointed at was not actually in the film. The problems did not stop there. On May 5, 2022, 3 days after the premiere, the video was flagged as made for kids by YouTube's automated systems, apparently on the basis that the film involved SpongeBob and therefore had to be children's content. That designation strips a video of comments, notifications, and most of its ability to be recommended to anyone. A couple of hours after that, Paramount blocked the video again. Within a single week, the project had been taken down twice and misclassified once, all by systems that never watched a frame of it. The film survived all of it. By October 28, 2022, roughly 6 months after release, the movie had passed 3 million views on YouTube. Ratings on listing sites settled just under 8 out of 10. The team behind it kept the account active afterward, using it to promote other fan projects and to point followers toward reanimated collaborations organized by people who had contributed to their film, including projects aimed at other cartoons entirely. That last detail is the part with the longest reach. Rehydrated did not end when the film came out. Contributors from the project went on to host their own collaborations, and the account behind the movie kept publicly boosting them, which turned a single finished film into a pipeline for the next round of projects. One contributor, credited on Rehydrated as the voice of the French narrator, went on to host a full reanimated collaboration for a different animated series. Another Rehydrated contributor hosted a project aimed at a completely separate franchise and recruited from the same pool of animators. What Rehydrated left behind is a proof of concept nobody had established before. A feature-length reanimated collaboration is possible. A volunteer team can hold together across 2 years and a change in leadership, and a fan project can absorb 3 separate automated takedowns in its first week and still reach millions of people. It also left behind the clearest example anyone has of the gap between how copyright enforcement works in theory and how it works in practice. In theory, a claim is reviewed and applied to infringing material. In practice, a film containing none of the original studio's animation, audio, or music was removed from the internet in under 2 hours, and the only reason it came back is that a hashtag got loud enough to be noticed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every project so far has been built by groups, and every one of them has been an act of affection toward the source material. One artist working alone took the same characters in a direction that made a large portion of the internet actively upset, and the result spread further than most of the tributes ever did. Section 5. The Nightmare Renders. Miguel Vasquez and hyperreal SpongeBob SquarePants was never designed to be looked at as a body. He is a rectangle with holes in it, 2 circles for eyes, and a mouth that changes shape depending on what the joke needs. Nothing about that design is meant to survive contact with anatomy. In April 2017, a 3-dimensional character artist named Miguel Vasquez posted images that forced the question anyway, and the internet spent the following months reacting to them. Vasquez works out of Southern California and builds digital sculptures, sharing his output across Instagram, ArtStation, and other art platforms. His SpongeBob work was part of a project he titled Best Friends Forever, which paired a realistic take on SpongeBob with a matching version of Patrick Star. The images circulated quietly for weeks before catching fire around the middle of June 2017, at which point they spread everywhere at once. The reaction was close to universal and close to negative, and that negativity was clearly part of the appeal. Coverage described the images as nightmare fuel. Outlets called them terrifying. Twitter users lined up to complain about the specific choices made in the renders, particularly around the eyes, which in the realistic version look permanently strained rather than cheerful. One of the most common objections raised at the time pointed out something structural about the whole exercise, that SpongeBob and Patrick were never meant to be human beings at all, since they exist in a world where a sponge, a starfish, a squirrel, and a crab are all roughly the same size, and nobody comments on it. Vasquez was not bothered by any of this. He has described the reaction as one of the best parts of the work, specifically the mix of love and disappointment coming from fans and non-fans alike. He has also explained the actual method behind it, and his explanation is more interesting than the reaction usually is. His stated preference is not to redesign these characters into something that would look plausible as a person. It is to bring the 2-dimensional design into 3 dimensions exactly as it already is, keeping every strange proportion intact rather than smoothing anything out. He has pointed to the fact that cartoon designs are frequently very odd once you actually look at them, and that translating those oddities faithfully rather than correcting them is what produces the effect. That distinction is the whole thing. A version of SpongeBob redesigned as a plausible human would be boring, because it would just be a person. What Vasquez produces is the original design rendered with skin, muscle, moisture, and weight, which means every choice that reads as friendly in the cartoon reads as wrong once it has texture. The wide eyes stop looking excited and start looking distressed. The permanent smile stops looking cheerful and starts looking forced. The porous surface, which is a simple pattern of circles in the show, becomes something a viewer can imagine touching. None of the underlying design changed, only the rendering did, and the rendering revealed things the flat version had been hiding the entire time. SpongeBob and Patrick were only the beginning. Vasquez followed with a realistic Squidward, which drew its own wave of attention, and he indicated at the time that Mr. Krabs was planned next. Outside Bikini Bottom, he has produced the same treatment for a long list of characters from the same era of television, including Homer Simpson, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Nigel Thornberry from the Wild Thornberrys, all three of the boys from Ed, Edd and Eddy, Luigi from the Mario games, Jessica Rabbit, and the lead character from Hey Arnold. Each release followed roughly the same pattern of spreading across social platforms and drawing a mixture of admiration for the technical work and complaints about the emotional damage. The Homer Simpson render is a useful comparison point because it demonstrates that the effect is not specific to SpongeBob. Homer's design in the cartoon has enormous white eyes that dominate his face, and rendering that faithfully in 3 dimensions produces something that reads as a medical condition rather than a character design. Viewers looking at it kept describing what they were seeing in clinical terms rather than artistic ones, which is exactly the point. The realistic version turns a design decision into a symptom. The genre these images belong to had existed before Vasquez and continued after him, and it has become one of the more durable categories of cartoon fan art on the internet. Artists across dozens of properties produce realistic versions of characters that were never meant to be realistic, and the audience for them is enormous. The images travel well because they need no context. A person who has never watched a full episode of SpongeBob still recognizes the character instantly, still understands the joke, and still has the same physical reaction to seeing him with pores. There is a serious version of what these images are doing, underneath the reaction videos and the horrified replies. Hyperreal renders function as a kind of criticism. They take a design that has been in front of an audience for decades, one that most viewers stopped actually looking at years ago, and force it back into view by changing one variable and leaving everything else alone. Someone who has seen SpongeBob 10,000 times has almost certainly stopped noticing that his eyes sit on the front of a flat rectangle, or that his mouth has no jaw behind it, or that the whole character is a kitchen object with a face drawn on it. A realistic render makes all of that impossible to ignore for about 4 seconds, which is longer than most people have consciously looked at that design in years. That is also why the negative reaction is not really a failure of the work. Complaints about ruined childhoods are the intended output. The images are built to be unwelcome, and the discomfort they produce is a measurement of how strongly the audience is attached to the original design. Nobody feels violated by a realistic render of a character they do not care about. The intensity of the response scales directly with how much the flat version meant to the person looking at it, which makes SpongeBob close to the ideal subject, since almost everyone under a certain age has a relationship with that shape whether they wanted one or not. What this corner of fan art left behind is a permanent template. The realistic cartoon render has become a standing genre, with its own conventions, its own regular audience, and its own reliable cycle of going viral every time somebody points it at a property that a large group of people grew up on. Vasquez did not invent the idea of drawing cartoon characters as humans, which artists have done for as long as cartoons have existed. What his SpongeBob work established was the specific, brutal version of it, the one that refuses to make the character look better, and instead makes the original design visible in a way the original never intended. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Not every piece of SpongeBob fan art gets made on purpose by a professional artist. Some of the most widely reproduced images in the show's entire history started as single frames that nobody involved in the production ever expected anyone to look at twice. Section 6. The accidental icons, meme art, and the frames. Nobody planned somewhere in a Nickelodeon storyboard room in the mid-2000s, an artist drew a version of Squidward tentacles who looked like a romance novel cover. That drawing was on screen for less than a minute. It was a throwaway gag inside a single episode, built to be looked at once and forgotten. 20 years later, it is one of the most reproduced images the show has ever generated, and almost none of that reproduction has anything to do with Nickelodeon. The image comes from a 5th season episode called The Two Faces of Squidward. In the story, SpongeBob accidentally slams a door into Squidward's face, and the injury somehow leaves him better looking than before. Bikini Bottom loses its mind over the new version of him, and the attention gets bad enough that Squidward begs SpongeBob to undo it. SpongeBob obliges by hitting him with the door repeatedly, which only makes the problem worse each time, escalating until the version that fans now call Handsome Squidward appears. The sequence ends with SpongeBob shoving him out of the path of a falling shoe, sending him into a slow spiral toward a column inside the Krusty Krab, which knocks his original face back into place. That spiral is the piece that broke containment. The way the character falls, arms out, expression untroubled, moving with more grace than anything else in the episode, turned into a clip that gets recut into thousands of other videos. Meme use of the character sorted itself into 3 separate categories over the years. The first is the plain image macro, usually built as a comparison where Handsome Squidward stands in for the superior option and some worse-looking version of the same character stands in for the alternative. The second is video, built around the falling clip and remixed against every piece piece of music imaginable. The third is fan art, where artists draw completely unrelated characters wearing that specific face. That third category is the one that matters here, because it is the point where a frame of official animation stops being a screenshot and turns into a drawing prompt. Artists have applied the handsome Squidward face to characters from other cartoons, from video games, from live-action films, and from real life. The pose, the lighting on the skin, and the specific angle of the head are all replicated closely enough that the reference is instant. A single frame became a template that thousands of people can execute from memory, which is a strange kind of achievement for a background gag. Nickelodeon eventually noticed. The company began featuring the meme on its own social media accounts, and a figure of handsome Squidward was manufactured and sold as part of a toy line built specifically around memes. Easter eggs referencing the image were built into official video games, including a painting hanging inside Squidward's house. A joke that fans built out of a frame the studio had forgotten about was purchased back by the studio and sold as merchandise. Handsome Squidward is not the only frame that took this path. In an episode called SB129, which aired on December 31st, 1999, Squidward travels back to the prehistoric era and encounters primitive versions of SpongeBob and Patrick, electrocuting themselves with a jellyfish. When Squidward speaks, the primitive SpongeBob turns around with a startled expression. That single turn became a meme around 2014 and hit its peak through the spring and summer of 2016, spreading first through image boards and then across social media generally. The naming of that meme is a small disaster that has never been corrected. Fans widely call the character SpongeGar, which is the name of a completely different character who happens to look similar. The wrong name spread so thoroughly that official merchandise and official games ended up using it as well, meaning Nickelodeon now sells products labeled with a name that fans invented by mistake. On the music board of one image board, the character became attached to a specific recurring joke about bands with two drummers, which is roughly as far from a children's cartoon as a meme can travel. The primitive SpongeBob frame followed the same path back into official material that handsome Squidward did. It was placed as an Easter egg inside a level of the remade Battle for Bikini Bottom game, tucked into a section of the Goo Lagoon area. It was added as a playable outfit in Fall Guys on August 31st, 2023. It appeared again inside a SpongeBob crossover pack for Minecraft. A face pulled from a 1999 episode by people making jokes on the internet became a purchasable cosmetic item in 3 separate video games. A third example makes the pattern undeniable. In an episode called Little Yellow Book, which first aired on November 25th, 2012, Squidward reads SpongeBob's diary. One frame from that episode shows SpongeBob bent forward with his arms folded behind him in a posture that looks something like a chicken. That image surfaced as a meme in May 2017 and became one of the most widely used reaction images on the entire internet, typically paired with text written in alternating capital and lowercase letters to signal that whatever is being said is being mocked. People who have never watched a single episode of SpongeBob SquarePants use that image regularly and correctly. There is one category on this list that works differently from all of the others, and it is the one closest to traditional fan art. Gangster SpongeBob is not a screenshot at all. It is an artist's rendition, a drawing somebody made of what the character would look like in that role, and it's spread on the strength of the drawing itself rather than because it came from an episode. That distinction is worth marking because it shows the meme ecosystem around this show is not purely extractive. Some of the most reproduced SpongeBob images in circulation were drawn by fans from scratch and entered the conversation on equal footing with material pulled from the actual series. Tom Kenny, who has voiced SpongeBob since the show began, has offered a reading of why this particular cartoon generates so much of this material. His observation points at something specific in the writing, that a large number of the memes people pull out of the show are built around anxiousness and anxiety, and that the show carries a great deal of that underneath its cheerfulness. That is a useful lens for looking at the list. Handsome Squidward is about unwanted attention. Primitive SpongeBob is a startled reaction to being caught. The mocking pose comes from an episode about somebody's private diary being read aloud. Squidward at his window, which produced its own long-running meme, is a character watching other people have a better time than he is having. The show was built to run those feelings underneath the comedy, and the internet extracted them and used them for exactly what they were made for. None of those frames were designed to carry weight. They carry it anyway, because the writing put it there and then moved on quickly enough that most viewers never consciously registered it. What this whole category left behind is a loop that runs in both directions. Nickelodeon produced frames. Fans isolated them, redrew them, remixed them, and gave several of them names the studio never chose. The studio then bought the results back, manufacturing toys, adding game content, and posting the memes from its own accounts. Somewhere in that loop, the question of who is making SpongeBob content and who is consuming it stopped having a clean answer, and the show ended up being partly authored by an audience that was never asked to contribute. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Redrawing a frame takes an afternoon. Building a working game around characters you do not own takes years, and the people who have tried it have run into a wall that no amount of talent or good intentions has has ever gotten them past. Section 7. The Fan Game Builders. Doodlebob, Roblox, and 8 million visits. In a second season episode called Frankendoodle, SpongeBob finds a pencil that fell into the ocean from a boat above, discovers that anything drawn with it becomes real, and accidentally creates a crudely sketched version of himself who immediately tries to destroy him. That character is Doodlebob, and he appears in one episode. Fans have been building things around him ever since, because a villain who is made entirely of drawings is close to a perfect subject for a game about drawing. The most complete attempt came from an animator and developer working under the name Techno Super Guy, whose real name is Ethan Wake, alongside a collaborator credited as Chaser 2008. The two of them built a game called Doodlebob and the Magic Pencil, and the origin of it is smaller and stranger than the finished product suggests. It was made in 2008 as a combined late birthday and early Christmas present for Wake's brother, using an early version of an engine the pair had built for an unrelated project of their own. It sat unreleased for 2 years before finally going public in 2010. The design pulls from 3 places at once. The setting and characters come from SpongeBob. The drawing mechanic comes from Drawn to Life, a game built around creating your own objects with a stylus. The structure comes from classic Mega Man, right down to a level select screen where defeated bosses turn gray, and the first 4 stages can be tackled in any order the player prefers. The story is the kind of thing only a fan would write. Plankton gets hold of the magic pencil, and although SpongeBob takes it back, Plankton has already copied the pencil's data onto his computer and can still produce doodles. He creates an army of them and uses them to take control of SpongeBob's friends. SpongeBob refuses to fight people he cares about, so he does the only reasonable thing available and brings Doodlebob back to life. Doodlebob, who holds no grudge about being trapped in a piece of paper, accepts the pencil, accepts a radio so the two can stay in contact, and goes to work. The boss fights that follow are built with real care. Patrick is under the control of a doodle bubble wand and has to be beaten by dodging bubble lasers and hitting a giant paint bubble repeatedly. Sandy dismisses the warnings about evil doodles, finds a doodle acorn, and turns into a monster, and the solution involves drawing a platform to stay out of range and then erasing a door so her own nutcracker robot can destroy the acorn. Squidward, wearing a doodle hairpiece, assumes Doodlebob has shown up to beat him up again and attacks with a supercharged clarinet. Along the way, the player can stop and vandalize Squidward's paintings, which serves no purpose whatsoever and is included purely because a fan making a SpongeBob game would obviously include it. The project did not stay in 2008. On September 28, 2019, Ethan Wake released a remake of the game on GameJolt, posting it alongside the original release so both versions remained available. A further expanded version followed under a director's cut style title. A present made for one person's brother has stayed in active development, on and off, for well over a decade. The largest fan game the property has ever produced took a different platform and a much rougher path. On Roblox, a developer working under the name SpongeBob's began building a SpongeBob project on April 6, 2016, originally titled SpongeBob Roleplay, and co-created with a developer credited as Cody J. Nutt. The idea came from wanting something similar to a Paper Mario roleplay game that was popular on the platform at the time. The earliest version was rough, built on an open landscape and using models and textures lifted from official SpongeBob games rather than original work. That version is not what people remember. Development accelerated sharply around December 2021, and the project relaunched at the end of that month under the name The Spongy Construction Project, completely reworked with new visuals and locations, built to match the show accurately rather than approximately. The response was enormous. The game reached roughly 8 million visits, which places it among the more successful fan-built experiences on a platform that hosts millions of them. On June 24, 2022, Paramount had it taken down. The developer's response and the community's response both matter here. SpongeBob's stated publicly that he and the development team had reached out to Paramount several times and received nothing back. Those posts spread widely, and the general reaction landed on the side of the developers, with most people pointing out the same fact repeatedly, that the project was not making money. A theory circulated that the takedown was connected to Nickverse, an official Nickelodeon experience that Paramount Game Studios had built on the same platform, but SpongeBob stated directly that the Nickverse developers had nothing to do with the situation. Months went by with no response from the company. Then, on April 1, 2023, with no explanation attached, the game came back online. Updates resumed at a regular pace. On June 28, 2023, the team announced a fully animated 3-dimensional opening cutscene with voice acting, which for a volunteer project on that platform is a significant milestone. Later that same day, the game was content deleted again over a copyright complaint. It was taken down once more in October 2023. The developers responded by publishing a joke game under a deliberately mangled version of their own title, which is roughly the only available form of protest when the counterparty will not answer messages. The pattern extends well past that one project. A horror game called Sponge, built by a group called Gibland in the style of the popular Roblox game Piggy, featured a version of SpongeBob with red pupils, an unsettling smiling smile, and his spatula. It was deleted around January 27, 2021. The team planned a redesigned successor called Soapy, but the plans were eventually cancelled, partly because the redesign work was substantial, and partly because the horror survival trend on the platform had faded by then. Other removed titles include Terror in Bikini Bottom, Survival of SpongeBob, Find the SpongeBob, and Work at a Krusty Krab, the last of which is credited with inspiring one of the most played games on the entire platform. What sits underneath all of this is a question about parody that never gets resolved in practice. Several of the removed games were parodies rather than recreations, and parody carries specific legal protection in the United States. That protection has never mattered much in a system where the removal happens first and the discussion happens afterward, if it happens at all. A developer with no legal budget facing a company with an unlimited one has one realistic option, which is to accept the removal and start over somewhere else. The corporate side of the story continued regardless. Paramount Game Studios was founded on February 22, 2022, and launched Nickverse, which was shut down on October 4, 2023. In February 2023, the company partnered with an outside studio to build official SpongeBob experiences on the platform. An official tower defense game followed on December 21, 2024. Fans watching this sequence noticed the shape of it immediately, and a common complaint was that the official replacements did not offer the roleplay experience that the removed fan project had built its audience on. There is one detail in this story that makes the whole thing considerably more uncomfortable. Assets built by the fan team for the Spongy construction project have appeared in videos published on the official Nicktoons channel. The models that were removed for infringing on the property were used to promote the property. What the fan game scene left behind is a body of work that mostly no longer exists in a playable form, documented across wikis maintained by the people who played it. Doodlebob and the Magic Pencil survived because it lives on a platform where a developer can host a file directly and nobody has come for it. The Roblox projects survived only as recordings, screenshots, and wiki entries, which is the same fate that met most of what this community has built at scale. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A pattern that clear does not go unnoticed by the people living inside it. The SpongeBob fan community spent the better part of a decade learning a specific lesson about where its work is safe, and the habits that came out of that lesson now shape how these projects get built before a single frame is drawn. Section 8. The Archive Instinct. How a fandom learned to save its own work. Every large fan project covered so far has one thing in common, and it is not the animation. It is the backup plan. The Help Wanted collab had a copy waiting on Newgrounds when the block arrived. The SpongeBob movie project had 2 parts uploaded to Newgrounds within hours of being removed. The AI streams eventually relocated onto private servers. None of that is coincidence, and none of it is improvised. It is the accumulated result of a community learning, project by project, that the platform hosting its work is not on its side. The habit did not appear all at once. It developed the way most survival behavior develops, which is by watching the same thing happen to enough people. An animator loses 2 years of work in under 2 hours. A game with 8 million visits disappears without a message. A channel takes copyright strikes for a video containing no copyrighted footage. After enough of those, the community stopped treating loss as an accident and started treating it as a scheduled event to plan around. Newgrounds became the first line of defense, and its suitability for the role is partly historical accident. The site has hosted independent animation since the era when browser-based work moved through Flash, which means it predates every major video platform currently in operation. It survived the shutdown of the technology it was originally built around. More importantly for this purpose, it operates on a completely different model from a modern video platform, with human curation, a portal built for finished creative work rather than an endless feed, and no automated content matching system scanning uploads against a corporate reference library. Work that gets removed from the largest platform on Earth can sit on Newgrounds indefinitely. The second line is more permanent and considerably stranger. Fan projects that get removed have a habit of turning up on the Internet Archive, the nonprofit that has been copying the web since the 90s. The Help Wanted collab is preserved there, complete with the original description text explaining that the project involved 80 or more animators, that it was organized by Extra Absorbent, that it was released on Steven Hillenburg's birthday, and that a copyright block had removed it from YouTube. That last note is doing something specific. It is not just preserving a video, it is preserving the record of what happened to the video. The third line is re-upload channels, which is the least sophisticated approach and possibly the most effective. Somebody takes the file and posts it again, sometimes on the original account, sometimes elsewhere, occasionally with a description stating plainly that this exists in case the previous version gets blocked again. It is a completely unglamorous solution that treats takedowns as weather rather than as an injustice worth arguing about, and it works because there is no realistic way to remove a file from the internet once enough people have a copy of it. The fourth line is retreat. When repeated removals made public streaming untenable, the AI-generated SpongeBob project moved into a private server, trading reach and accessibility for the ability to keep operating at all. Of that trade has real costs. Audiences shrink, discovery stops, and material that used to be rewindable on a public platform becomes considerably harder to archive. It is the option people take when the other three have failed. Sitting behind all four of these is a documentation culture that most fandoms never developed to this degree. There is a wiki dedicated to the show itself, maintained by fans, that catalogs episodes, characters, running jokes, memes, and the specific history of how each one entered public use. There are separate wikis dedicated entirely to fan-created material, cataloging fan episodes, fan characters, fan games, and projects that no longer exist anywhere else. There is a wiki devoted specifically to a single Roblox fan game, tracking its development history from 2016 through each of its 3 removals with dates attached. That last one is worth sitting with. Volunteers maintained a detailed public record of a game that has been deleted 3 times, documenting the development timeline, the names of the original creators, the reason for each takedown, and the developer's public statements about trying to reach the company. When the game itself is gone, the record of what it was and what happened to it remains, written by people who were not compensated for any of it. The credit spreadsheets belong to this same instinct. A large collab publishes a public document listing every contributor with timecodes attached, so that any second of the finished video can be traced to the person who animated it. That serves the obvious purpose of giving credit, but it does something else at the same time. It means that even if the video is removed permanently, the record of who made what survives independently in a document the platform does not control. There is a reason all of this developed around this particular property rather than others. SpongeBob sits at an unusual intersection. It is old enough that people who grew up on it are now adults with professional skills. It is popular enough that fan projects reach large audiences quickly, and it is owned by a company that has enforced its rights aggressively across every platform the fandom has tried to use. Fan communities around properties with more relaxed rights holders never had to develop these habits because they never lost enough work to justify the effort. The behavior that came out of it is not really about copyright. It is about a group of people concluding that the platforms they depend on will not protect what they make and deciding to build their own redundancy rather than argue about it. Nobody in this community organized that decision. There was no announcement and no agreement. It emerged the way conventions usually emerge, which is by enough individuals independently reaching the same conclusion after watching the same thing happen repeatedly. What that instinct left behind is a fandom that functions partly as its own institution. It hosts, it mirrors, it documents, and it maintains records of its own losses. A person who wants to understand what the SpongeBob fan animation community has produced over the past 15 years can reconstruct almost all of it, including the parts that were removed, because the community assumed from the start that nobody else was going to keep those records for them. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Preserving work assumes there is still work being made by people. Around 2023, a different kind of SpongeBob content started appearing at a volume no human team could match, and it arrived without a single animator attached to it. Section 9, The Machine Wave, AI Sponge, and Glorb. On March 5, 2023, a live stream went online that never stopped. It showed low-quality models of SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and the rest of the Bikini Bottom cast standing around and talking to each other 24 hours a day, with no episodes, no plot, and no ending. None of the dialogue was written by a person. The channel was called AI Sponge, and the whole thing ran on a language model producing conversation in real time, based on topic suggestions submitted by members of a Discord server. The idea was borrowed. A Twitch channel called Nothing Forever had already done the same thing with Seinfeld characters, generating an endless sitcom that never resolved and never repeated. Pointing that format at SpongeBob was an obvious next move, and it worked better than it had any right to, mostly because the characters are simple enough that a language model can approximate them without needing to be good at it. The results were consistently strange and frequently obscene, which is the direction any system built on public topic suggestions inevitably goes. The stream had its own visual grammar too. Background events ran continuously behind the conversations, including fish wandering through and, in later versions, vehicles that could run characters over while the dialogue continued without acknowledgement. Viewers could pay $3.33 to have a background fish named after them, and could request AI-generated song covers performed by the characters. The audience built its own vocabulary around the technical failures rather than complaining about them. The generated Squidward voice came out considerably louder than everything else, and viewers started calling him Loudward. Because the audience could submit topics, that nickname eventually got submitted, which meant the characters began referring to Squidward as Loudward inside the stream itself. Other fan nicknames worked their way in the same way. The audience was writing the show by naming its bugs. The copyright response arrived on June 7, 2023, when Paramount issued a claim that ended the ongoing stream and took down the channel. A replacement channel appeared on June 8 and was announced the following day, launched with the music removed and donations disabled specifically to avoid another claim. Donations came back not long after. On June 14th, at around 12:16 in the afternoon Eastern Time, a second claim interrupted the stream and shut the the second channel down. A third channel started up using an account that had been created back on November 29, 2013, and lasted less than a day before a third claim ended it. The project outlasted its channels but not the tools underneath it. The original stream ended on July 25, 2023, and the reason had nothing to do with Paramount. The voice provider the project relied on removed public support for voices that had been trained on copyrighted performances, a decision reportedly connected to support for the 2023 actors' strike, where the possibility of performers being replaced by generated voices was one of the central issues on the table. The creator was also exhausted by that point, which is understandable for somebody who had spent 4 months running an endless broadcast and losing it repeatedly. Revivals followed almost immediately. One creator launched a rebooted version that moved through testing stages before settling into regular streaming later in 2023. Another version appeared under a different operator and changed hands again afterward. A third attempt ran briefly and faded once the others established themselves. The revivals inherited the original problem. One of them took its first Paramount claim on June 13, 2024, months into its run, and another on July 8, 2024, after which it relocated to a private server where it remains harder to find and harder to archive, but considerably harder to remove. A companion stream built around Family Guy characters ran alongside it through the same period. The second half of this story is more musical and considerably more successful. Starting in June 2023, an anonymous creator working under the name Glorb began releasing rap tracks performed by AI-generated versions of the SpongeBob cast. The characters were given new names for the purpose. SpongeBob became SpongeOp, Mr. Krabs became Mr. Swags, Squidward became Squidwalk, Patrick became Notorious P.A.T, Plankton became Dankton. Sandy got her own variation as well. The music is not a novelty in the way that description makes it sound. The lyrics are packed with references to the actual show, built around a running conflict between the Krusty Krab crew and Plankton, with the fictional restaurant rivalry rewritten as a territorial dispute. The wordplay is dense enough that listeners have written detailed breakdowns of individual lines, including one about Squidward being a stone-faced killer that works simultaneously as a description of his personality and a reference to the fact that his house is shaped like a face carved from stone. The scale it reached is difficult to overstate for a project made by one anonymous person. A track called The Bottom 2 premiered on December 6, 2023, and became the breakout. Within a few months, it had passed 11 million streams on Spotify, and the artist was averaging just under 1 million monthly listeners on the platform. Later tracks pushed further, with several crossing into the tens of millions of plays. The music videos, built using character models from the show, pulled in millions of views on their own. The spread onto short video platforms is where it stopped being a music project and became something closer to a cultural event. A section near the end of The Bottom 2 gives each character a short individual verse, and that segment became the basis for enormous numbers of edits. In February 2024, a creator posted a version built inside Roblox where each character had a unique model and dance for their verse, and it collected close to 200,000 likes. In April, another creator swapped the Bikini Bottom cast for members of a well-known pop group and collected 250,000 likes. The song had detached from the source material entirely and become a format that other people used for their own purposes. Glorb has never revealed an identity, has declined interviews, and has no affiliation with Nickelodeon or Paramount. One detail that has slipped out anyway is geographic. The voice conversion tool masks the creator's own accent well on most tracks, but on a handful of songs, an Australian accent comes through clearly enough for listeners to notice. The reaction from audiences has been unusually complicated, and it is the most interesting part of this whole section. Generative tools are broadly unpopular with the exact audience that consumes independent animation and fan work, for reasons that are neither mysterious nor unreasonable, since those tools are trained on the labor of the people watching. One widely shared comment on a video featuring Glorb's music said plainly that whenever the commenter criticizes this technology, this particular work is excluded from the criticism. That sentiment showed up repeatedly across the same conversation. The reason it gets excluded is worth naming clearly. Glorb writes the lyrics, Glorb performs them first, and the tool converts the vocals afterward. The songwriting, the jokes, the references, and the delivery all come from a person, and the generated element is limited to what the voice sounds like at the end of the process. That places it closer to a heavily processed vocal than to something generated from a text prompt, and audiences appear to be drawing that distinction on their own, without anybody explaining it to them. The legal questions underneath both projects remain completely unsettled. Experts who study these tools have pointed out that the ownership situation around generated voices imitating characters somebody else owns has no clean answer yet, and no court has produced one. Paramount has acted anyway, repeatedly, through the same automated claim process that removed reanimated collaborations and Roblox games. Whether the material qualifies as protected parody has never been argued anywhere that would produce a ruling. What this wave left behind is a genuine split inside the same fan community. The reanimated collaborations represent thousands of hours of human drawing donated freely to a tribute. The generated Generated streams represent content produced faster than any human team could match, with no drawing involved at all. Both are fan work. Both got removed by the same company using the same tools for the same stated reason. And the audience that celebrated the first category has spent the past few years working out, in public and without much agreement, how it feels about the second. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Underneath every project covered so far, from the collabs to the games to the generated streams, sits one man who spent years convincing a network that a cartoon about a sea sponge was worth making. When he died, the response from the people he had never met took a form that nobody organized and nobody expected. Section 10, The Tribute Wall, November 2018, and the art nobody was asked to make Nickelodeon announced it on Twitter. Steven Hillenburg had died on November 26, 2018, at 57 years old, at his home in San Marino, California. The cause was ALS, the motor neuron disease he had publicly disclosed being diagnosed with in March 2017. Within hours, people who had never met him began drawing. The scale of what followed is the part worth understanding. This was not a handful of professional illustrators posting condolences. Artists across the world, working at every level from teenagers with tablets to veteran industry designers, produced original artwork and posted it within days. Aggregators collected the tributes into galleries running to 50 pieces and more, and those galleries were incomplete. Art sites filled with dedications. Social feeds turned into a rolling exhibition that ran for the better part of a week. Hillenburg's own background explains a lot about why the response took that specific shape. He was born on August 21, 1961 in Lawton, Oklahoma, and studied marine biology at Humboldt State University, earning a degree focused on marine resources in 1984. He then taught at a marine institute in Dana Point, California, which is not a normal entry on the resume of somebody who would go on to create one of the most watched cartoons ever made. He went back to school afterward for animation and earned a fine arts degree in 1992. His work caught the attention of Joe Murray, the creator of Rocko's Modern Life, which got him a professional job at Nickelodeon and put him inside the industry properly. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered in 1999, and he worked on the property until his death. That path, from a completely different field into animation, was cited over and over in the tributes themselves. A large share of the artists posting work described the show as the reason they started drawing at all. One artist posting to a large art community wrote that he did not usually make this kind of thing, but that the show had been a major part of his childhood and had been the reason he pushed himself to get good at art. A 15-year-old artist said the show was one of the first cartoons he was introduced to and one of the reasons he was pursuing animation. That specific sentiment, that this show turned viewers into artists, appeared so consistently across the tributes that it stopped reading as coincidence. The professional side of the industry showed up too. Andy Sherman, who had previously worked as a character designer at Cartoon Network, drew a tribute placing Hillenburg together with SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab and thanked him publicly for the laughs. Political cartoonists, who normally work on subjects with nothing to do with children's television, produced pieces of their own. Carlos Latouf drew a tribute the day after the announcement and framed it around a specific idea, that SpongeBob's job going forward was to raise awareness of ALS. A sports cartoonist named Omar Momani drew SpongeBob as an angel with a harp and noted that the show had been a constant reference point in his own understanding of cartooning. The visual patterns across the tributes settled quickly, and they were consistent given that nobody coordinated any of it. A large portion of the artwork placed Hillenburg and SpongeBob together in the same frame, usually with the character looking up at him. Another common approach used the Krusty Krab kitchen with nobody in it, which carries its meaning without needing any text attached. Many pieces used bubbles, which the show has always used as a shorthand for both joy and impermanence. Several used variations on a line from the series about how dying in a fiery explosion caused by a friend's carelessness would be acceptable, which is the kind of joke that only becomes usable in a memorial when the audience knows the source that well. The tribute wave did not stop when the news cycle did. The petition to have Sweet Victory performed at the Super Bowl started within days of the announcement and eventually gathered around 1.2 million signatures. The Help Wanted reanimated collaboration, already in production, was completed and released on August 21, 2019, which was Hillenburg's birthday. A group of musicians recorded and posted a live performance of Sweet Victory in December 2018 and dedicated it to him directly. Marching bands played the song at stadiums. Hockey teams played it at arenas. What separates all of this from ordinary celebrity mourning is that almost none of it was consumption. When most public figures die, the response involves sharing existing material, quoting existing lines, and reposting existing images. The response to Hillenburg involved an enormous volume of people making entirely new things and giving them away. Drawings that took hours, animation projects that took months, musical performances organized specifically for the occasion, a petition drive that ran for 2 months. None of it generated money for anybody, and most of the people who made it will never be identified by name. That distinction says something specific about what the show actually did. Hillenburg built a cartoon out of very simple shapes, drawn in a style that a child can copy on paper without much much difficulty. Millions of children copied it. A meaningful percentage of those children kept drawing, and by 2018 they were adults with real skills and a clear sense of who to thank. The tributes were not just expressions of sadness. They were, in a very direct way, a demonstration of the show's actual output, which was a generation of people who learned that making things was something a person could do. Everything else covered in this video runs on the same fuel. The 80 animators who reanimated the first episode. The 140 who reanimated Band Geeks. The team that spent 2 years rebuilding a feature film shot by shot and recording every line themselves. The developer who spent 6 years building a Roblox world and rebuilt it after each takedown. The animator who taught himself to draw fight scenes by rewinding anime frame by frame and then aimed that skill at a fry cook. None of those people were hired. All of them were, at some point, children copying a very simple yellow rectangle onto a piece of paper. The company that owns the property has spent the past decade removing a great deal of that work from the internet, sometimes within hours of it appearing. The work keeps getting made anyway, mirrored to other sites, documented on wikis, rebuilt after deletion, and handed around by people who assume from the start that they will have to protect it themselves. That is the actual legacy of a marine biology teacher who decided to go back to school for animation, and it is considerably larger than the show. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.